In the most recent update to the game, we have seen Uma awakened. She's been released with a 4-star ability, which synergizes directly off her active army skill, and it also has a disarm status attached to it, so she is very much synergistic with the female synergy. And I'm going to look into the question of, is she any good, and should people be awakening her, and if so, who? So I have here examples of her 4-star ability in reports, as well as her full awakening stats. So first of all, she does have combat rate in the tavern. So if you already have her at, say, level 60 in the tavern, getting her to just 2-star will give you, in that scenario, 60 combat rate. So pretty much everyone, at least long term, should be looking to get to at minimum 2-star because of that. And then as far as her awakening stats go, she's basically the same as Winton. She has troop attack, so in this case, Spearmen attack up to 66%. She has cavalry health reduction up to 42% at max, and then total defense reduction of 35.2% at max. These stats alone are fairly good, actually. The fact she has spear attack is very solid, and Spearmen have historically always had a lack of low spending or free-to-play options to go in that synergy type, so purely from these stats alone, let alone her awakening skill, which can also be good, she will belong in all free-to-play Spearmen lineups, so that's immediately a role that she will see herself fit into. But past that, it's going to be fairly dependent on her awakening skill, on if she's viable anywhere else in any other higher pay bracket compositions. So 5 seconds after the battle begins, that means this can't activate off Salma procs at 1 second, so that's an important note. When Uma casts an active army skill, she will inflict the disarm status on enemy lineups with death markers for 4 seconds. So death markers, the only one in the game currently, is Arya's off her active, and this relationship with Arya is going to be fundamental to how good Uma is, because she will target these death marker lineups with a disarm. And then if we look at Arya's weapon, as soon as you have Arya's weapon equipped, it will gain an additional effect of when her active is cast into a disarm, then a percentage of the troops that you kill will be rerouted away from your enemy. So these two commanders synergize very well together with this, since Uma will target the death markers, Uma will apply the disarm, and then because of the disarm, Arya will reroute troops away through that. So these two are very synergistic, and interestingly, this doesn't actually require synergy enablers to work. So this is actually a route into synergy for free-to-play players, which is quite a unique niche, because typically you always need either Layla, Jamie, or Sonara for synergy to function. That isn't the case here with Uma, particularly because of this last part of her awakening tooltip, where it says it can only trigger up to 2 times in a battle. So there's a limit to it. So even with Layla and getting tons of active reprocs, you're still going to get the same amount of value from this as you would in a free-to-play formation. So this is actually a very, very good pairing for low-spending players. If there are no lineups with death markers, a random lineup will be targeted. Triggers up to 2 times in a battle. Cooldown is 10 seconds. This cooldown is 10 seconds bit scared me a bit, because I was a bit worried when I first read that it wouldn't be able to disarm at, say, 11 seconds and then 21 seconds. Because maybe this counts as the 10th second and it'll still be on cooldown. But as you can see in these reports, it disarms here on the 11th second and disarms here on the 21st second. So the 11th and 21st second is always going to be when Uma's disarm procs, because of this 5 seconds after the battle begins part means it can't proc off Salma. So it can't proc at 1 second, and it can only trigger up to 2 times, so it won't be casting at 30 or 40 seconds either. So it will always be at 11 seconds, always be at 21 seconds. In terms of the value of the disarm itself, you're disarming 1 lineup out of 5 for 4 seconds twice, so a total of 8 seconds. You're using 40 seconds as the total amount of attacking time. then this would be a 4% reduction to normal attack damage from your opponent. It will actually be a bit higher than that because of the movement times in the first few seconds, actually not making it 40 seconds in total, but somewhere between, say, 4 and 5% of their normal attack damage will be removed from this, which is honestly not terrible, particularly for free-to-play players. Like, that's fairly decent. It's nothing crazy, don't get me wrong, but it's not negligible either. The one potential issue you will run into is ensuring that you actually get value from this Uma and Arya with weapon relationship. So what I mean by that is, if you look, the reason I've included this full second of active castings in this leftmost report is, if you look at the enemy columns here, look at the numbering of how the actives cast. So you see the first active that casts is column 1, then it's column 2, then it's column 3, then column 4, then column 5. So the reason I specify this is, say your Arya is in column 1 and casts her active here. If your Uma, for example, is then in column 5 and casts her active there, you're then disarming Arya's lineup after Arya has already cast her active. So you're going to want to deliberately sequence Uma before Arya in your formation, which is a fairly unique thing to do, but it will actually be very important. And the key to this will be running, ideally, a full female composition with Layla Salma, and then Salma will ideally proc Arya at 1 second to apply a death marker onto her opposing lineup, and then when it comes to 11 and 21 seconds, if you sequence Uma before Arya in your columns, Uma will then target the lineup facing Arya, disarm into the death marker, and then Arya will hit into it at 11 seconds, reroute the additional troops because of the disarm, and then do the same at 21 seconds too. But that is a really, really important thing to note, because if you set up your lineup as, say, how do I show this exactly? So if you do it like this, the disarm in column 5 is going to come after Arya has already cast. So make sure you sequence it as Uma casting as soon as possible, ideally. So put her in column 1, I'd say, and then just make sure Arya at least comes after her in some sense. Doesn't necessarily matter where, but just as far away as from Uma as you can get her, to just ensure that she will cast into the disarms that Uma will apply on her lineup. If you don't have Salma to cast into this first 5 seconds, this does get a bit more awkward, because then in the same ordering that I posed there won't already be a death marker on Arya's lineup, so Uma will disarm a random lineup, and then on the second casting, there'll already be the death marker there, so you'll get the functionality as normal. But it becomes random on that first disarm, so Salma alongside these two with Arya with weapon is actually very, very important at maximizing the value here. So for like a full female composition at that mid-spender level, if you have Arya's weapon, which I've gone over last video at the time of recording in terms of how good that weapon actually is, that trio of Salma, Arya, Uma is honestly very, very strong. Arya's weapon is required for it, but it is theoretically free to play. I know you have to win time on the mine, which is a lot easier said than done, depending on where you are. And I do think Uma's value is quite heavily tied to that interaction. So if you don't have Arya's weapon, she does lose a lot. But if you do have that weapon, for mid-spender female players, for your female compositions there, this becomes a definite pick, I think. She isn't a terrible commander by any means. She's actually very, very good in that situation. So as I list down here, good option for all free-to-play spear players. She belongs in every free-to-play spear composition, I think. And then I think all mid-spender female spear players as well. Just make sure you have Salma casting Arya at 1 second to get that death marker on before this 11-second mark. And then make sure your Uma is sequenced before your Arya in your lineup to make sure that disarm goes on before Arya casts her active.